Hello and happy Thursday. Welcome to another Lunch and Learn with Purse Strings. All of this month, we are talking about caring for aging parents and kind of the cost that has and other kind of effects it has on us all together. And so we're super excited to have Marguerita Cheng here to talk about this and kind of share some of her real life experience as well. So for any of those who are new here, Purse Strings is all about tips, tricks, pieces of advice on how to be financially fearless. And then when you need to start planning for, taking care of an aging parent, getting that will and trust, planning for retirement, whatever it may be, we have top tier financial professionals willing, ready, and able to help you. We call those our Purse Strings approved professionals, and Marguerita Cheng is one of them. So before we dive into this conversation, could you introduce yourself to the audience?
Well, thank you so much, Maggie. I'm really excited to be here. I'm Marguerita Cheng. My nickname is Rita, and I'm a certified financial planner based here in the DMV. DMV means DC, Maryland, and Virginia. So I live in the M, Maryland, very close to our nation's capital.
Awesome. And we're so excited to have you on today and bring your expertise. And I know this is a topic that's near and dear to your heart. So do you want to start by telling a little bit about, your experience as a caregiver for kind of caring for your dad?
Absolutely. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, personally and professionally. And I do share my story, not because I think it's so great, I think it can be helpful to others. So, it can be the thing that I just put out there is I know this is a difficult topic. And I think that when you're a consumer and you're talking to your loved ones, just come from a place of care. We love you. This is why I want to talk about it. So I'll tell you about my parents. So when my parents were 54 and 68, I encouraged them to do long-term care planning. Now, that doesn't necessarily involve buying insurance. It's like, Mommy, Daddy, if anything were to happen to you, needed care, where would you like to receive that care? Who do you want to provide the care?
Yeah.
And, how do you don't like do it in a sassy way. Is there a particular asset that you've set aside to pay for that care? So we didn't even talk about products. And I used the birth of my second child as a way to kind of talk about this because, and at that time, my mom was 54 and she said, gosh, isn't this for old people? And I was like, Mommy, like you're young and beautiful. This isn't for old people. I was like, it would just be inappropriate for me to decide what you and Daddy want to do. I thought it's a good time to talk about this because I know how much you love your granddaughter. That was my first child. And you're so excited to have your grandson. That's my second child because I'm one of three girls. So they were very excited. I said, I think it's really important for us to talk about this now because my younger sister had just graduated college, so they had to update their estate plan.
Yeah.
And I said, but this isn't about like being young or old. This is about making sure that you and Dad still have independence, choice, and control. I want you to be in control. My mom's like, yeah, I like being in control. And so it was just a lot of nudges along the way. So remember, I told you that was my daddy was 68. When my dad was, and they did actually plan for long-term care. They updated their wills, they right-sized, and they moved to a smaller place. And we did purchase long-term care insurance, but we didn't do all this right at once.
Right.
My mom, there's a big age difference, got compound. My dad's simple. So fast forward, when my dad was 73, my dad fell a couple times. We thought that maybe it was a tumor, brain tumor. At first, it was kind of hard for people to figure out what was wrong with my dad because he was healthy otherwise. My dad was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease when he was 73. Now, remember I told you he got this policy when he was 68. He'd been paying premium for a while. And for the most part, the reason why it was very hard is my dad didn't have any tremors. I understand Parkinson's gets worse, but the typical symptoms that we see, he didn't really have. He didn't have tremors. He didn't have shakes. So by the time my dad reached 78, he still was like, I don't know if I have Parkinson's. He was not necessarily easy on his feet. I encouraged him to do Tai Chi, but he said he didn't like it. He was too slow for him. I
Yeah.
was like, okay, Daddy, maybe that's not like the right thing for you. But it can help with balance and mindfulness. Um, but my dad's health started to take a precipitous decline when he was 78. And my dad, remember I said that, he had this insurance. Like, why do I have this? I'm here to tell you the first 6 years or so of his diagnosis wasn't that bad. But the last 3 years, here I was caring for an 80-year-old father and my 8-year-old daughter. So
Yeah.
I understand what it's like to be sandwiched. You're feeling overwhelmed. And so I'll just stop there and allow you to ask me any questions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I appreciate you sharing your story. And I love how you started that, this long term care planning does not just mean buy long term care insurance. It is so much more than that. And it's just like, if you ask your parents, who do you want to care for you? Who do you want to wipe your butt if you can't do it? Chances are they don't want you to do it. So it's like, okay, then how are we going to make that happen? Let's make a plan for that right now. Um, and it was also that you were, the thing about insurance is that you have to get it before you're sick. And so your mom was like, no, I'm young, I'm healthy. And that's exactly what we want. That's what we're looking for, is to do this while you're still young and healthy, because you never know when this Parkinson's is going to kind of come on, or whatever you might have going on. And so, what are some of your, pieces of advice to kind of families who are realizing they're going to become the caregiver? I think one of the things you kind of mentioned is really start the conversation early, because it does take a couple nudges and it's a slower process. Nothing happens overnight. But what else do you kind of recommend?
Well, the first thing is yes. The sooner you start, the better, because you have a longer runway to plan. And
Mhm.
whatever I say is come from a place of care. Like someone from college reached out to me because he read one of my articles that I wrote on Kiplinger. And of course, I remember people from college. He's like, how do I talk to my mommy? And I said, so what you need to do is just say, Mommy, we love you. You have to start with that.
Yeah.
And we're compliant here because he's not a client. He sent me a text message, and he's allowed to because he's not a client. He said, thank you. That was really, really helpful. My mom was very receptive. And yes, nudges along the way. If you have siblings, make sure that you are involving them. I know, some siblings may live far away and may not be able to be as involved in the process, but that doesn't mean they can't be engaged, right? And then I would say, whatever you do, as overwhelming as it can be, this is so important for women. Don't quit your job, because this really can affect. Imagine me. I love my daddy. I love my 3 kids. But if I quit at that time when my daughter was 8, I
Mhm.
also had a 15-year-old and a 17-year-old. This is like a time where my family does need me. So don't quit your job. Also, ask for help.
Yeah.
Um, it is not a sign of weakness. And it's not necessarily money. It could mean, hey, maybe there's a carpool.
Mhm.
Um, you know, something as simple as that. And then, of course, take advantage of resources available through your employer. Employee assistance programs. Sure, they may not be able to pay for your parents' long-term care, but sometimes part of those programs, they may have vetted, certain providers. Again, you
Yeah.
still have to pay, but the fact that they're vetted, or there's an agency they work with, can make things, easier, so you don't have to go at it alone.
Yeah. And it seems like, I mean, you're the definition of that sandwich generation, taking care of your parents, the 3 kids, and working. I mean, that's also a ton to take on. So, even we had somebody write in and tell us that the biggest thing with caretaking is let people help you and be willing to ask for help, because, on the sidelines, everyone does want to help you as well. You're right. It doesn't always have to be financial, but just a dinner or car ride is super helpful sometimes.
Absolutely. And then sometimes you're so overwhelmed you can't even think about like how people can help you, but think about like errands,
Yeah.
right? And I think what was also helpful is when my oldest child was able to drive, like I could have her pick up grandpa's prescription, or I could coordinate like with my sister who takes off to keep dad company. So it isn't always money. I know things cost money, and I'd be remiss if I did not acknowledge it, but there's other ways in which people can, lend support.
Yeah, definitely. And so if someone is kind of thinking, the cost of caretaking versus um, having someone come help or, leaving their job, it sounds like you would recommend not leaving your job most of the time, because it is, it has such long-term effects. Is that what you would agree with?
I would agree. I mean, obviously, there's some times where you have no choice.
Of course.
Um, and family first. And so this is actually what's interesting. So as mentioned, my dad's health started to decline precipitously. Um, that's about at the time when I was really thinking about, um, you know, moving from the large firm to start my own firm. And people would say, well, why would you do that? I needed to be in a little bit more control of my schedule. So I still did work. But the benefit about working for myself is there's other things I could do. And my CFP ethics program, I actually wrote that program
Wow.
when I was sitting on the floor when my dad had pneumonia. Like my dad had 2 bouts of pneumonia. And right about the time when my dad had pneumonia, I was like, you know what? Yes, I need to stay productive. I need to care for my family. I need to care for my clients. So I didn't necessarily let the quality of client engagement suffer. I may not have acquired as many clients because I
Mhm.
wanted to make sure I could manage. But what I did is I was creative. I was thinking, okay, what can I do to make sure I'm still taking care of my family, help people, and um, earn income that is compliance approved. And I said, you know what? Talking about CFP ethics. This is an ethical dilemma. And that's actually when I wrote the program. Like, daddy had pneumonia twice, and I was like, I wasn't going to leave him. I
Yeah.
sat on the floor um, next to his hospital bed, and I wrote this program. So, my recommendation is obviously if you need to quit your job, you do what you have to do, but
Right.
it's not just the income you're losing, it's the Social Security earnings, the 401k match, and other benefits.
Right. Definitely. Definitely. It is a lot, but I'm impressed with how productive you're able to make that time. And sometimes it is just kind of sitting there in a room with someone and a lot of time you can kill. And so if you do have some flexibility of where you can work or when you can work, that's super helpful in a time like this. And I think we've seen a lot of that during COVID too, when we're taking care of kids and parents at home. Um, and then my last kind of question for you is, did you have a plan in place of like um, having all their doctors written down and having all their information, kind of having a conversation with your parents of sharing that essential knowledge just so everyone kind of has it and knows where it is?
So, and I know this is difficult because some people may not feel comfortable sharing. So I always say every family is different.
Yeah.
When my dad's condition really started to decline, um, I was the one that, and my dad could no longer drive. I was the one that took my dad to every doctor's appointment.
Hmm.
So, and even before so my dad got his diagnosis when he was 73, and someone recommended that he get cataract surgery. This is before he really started to decline. And I said,
Hmm.
yes, that makes sense because anything I can do to prevent fall risk is going to be good. So my
Yeah.
dad had cataract surgery. And so I took him to every appointment. So he was comfortable, you know, sharing his medical information.
Right.
When it was time to like renew a prescription, I was able to call the provider and they would, um, release that information because when you take them to the doctor, you fill out the form. I
Right.
allow this information to be released, and my dad would sign it. For some people, they may not be comfortable, but this is why when he really became sick, we didn't have to, there were fewer things that we had to stress about. We didn't have to worry, how we're going to pay for his care. And we didn't have to worry about, the doctor not wanting to talk to us or communication gaps. So I can't emphasize that enough that
Yeah.
um, encourage your parents. And it isn't always dire. It could be something as simple as refilling a prescription because my
Hmm.
dad is very petite. My dad was 5'8", but by
Wow.
the time he passed away, he was only 5'5". So I recall a time when, he was fine, but his medicine was making him dizzy. And a lot of people dismissed it. Oh, you have Parkinson's. But I was listening to my dad, and my dad's like, no, this is a different type of dizzy. And I took him to the doctor, and like, sure enough, the time release medicine was not appropriate for his situation because he is very petite.
Yeah.
It would not do time release. It would all go into his system at once, and it made him dizzy. So this was a situation where it wasn't dire. The doctor said, you know what, instead of doing time release, if he's okay with it, I would prefer that he take his medicine 3 times a day instead of twice a day. So I tell people it's not always something where someone is going to die or terminal situation where I just wanted to, talk to the doctor about like what we can do. And you know what? That provider took his blood pressure sitting, standing, and my dad felt his feelings were like validated that, you know what, this isn't just Parkinson's. I do feel a little bit dizzy.
Yeah. And it's so great to have that advocate by your side, someone who understands and can kind of help stick up for you or see these things, that you don't always see in yourself. Yeah, it seems like, he had the best care, and it's great that you got on top of this stuff so early, the long-term care planning and these different things. And we're able to financially prepare for all of this as well. So it was less of a burden on the family, even though it's always very hard seeing someone, age. We talked about a lot of great things today. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you want to make sure is shared?
I would also encourage people, there's support groups there. Even if you're not comfortable sharing and you just want to get information because it can be really uncomfortable, just listen to your other stories and know how other families have managed can be really helpful so that that you're not alone.
Definitely. Yep. It is something that we're all going through, so we definitely want to talk about. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing your story and your expertise today. And so we just want to let anyone know that if they're going out there, we have financial professionals to help them. We have Medicare specialists, long-term care specialists, whoever may need wills and trusts. We can get those updated. Let's take some action while we can. So thank you again, Marguerita, for coming on today. Her email has been going through the bottom down here. She's also one of our Purse Strings approved professionals, so you can check her out on our site, pursestrings.co. And we'll be back here again next week with another great conversation. So thank you, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.